Hey, everybody, we're going to be reading Mrs. Jeepers is Missing, chapters 1 and 2. So go ahead and open up your book and follow along with me. This is horrible, Eddie complained. No one should have to do this. Liza giggled. Mrs. Jeepers is being nice by inviting us to this end of the year party. You're acting like she's going to barbecue you for supper. Liza, Eddie, and their friend Howie and Melody stood on the crumbling sidewalks to the old Clancy estate, where their third grade teacher lived. Most of the kids thought Mrs. Jeepers was a little strange, maybe even a vampire. They were sure the green brooch she always wore had magical powers. Every time she rubbed it, her green eyes flashed and the brooch glowed brighter and brighter. It even stopped Eddie from misbehaving too much. I say we should go while we still can, Eddie said. Howie nodded, looking up at the peeling paint on the huge Clancy mansion. Broken shutters hung at the lopsided angles, and a branch from a nearby dead oak tree scraped against a cracked window. We could turn around and leave, Howie said. Mrs. Jeepers would never know the difference. Mrs. Jeepers put up with us for most of the year, Melody reminded them. It won't hurt us to be nice for a few minutes. A vampire teacher sucking my blood dry is sure to hurt a little bit, Eddie argued. Eddie turned to leave when a girl from their class came through the gate behind them. Hi, Eddie, Carrie squealed, grabbing Eddie's arm. Isn't this exciting? Yeah, Eddie muttered. Just like watching paint dry. Carrie ignored Eddie and chattered on. Here we are, invited to one of the oldest houses in Bailey City for an evening barbecue, and you're such a grouch. Come on, I hear some of the other kids. Carrie pulled Eddie around to the back of the house. Melody, Howie, and Liza followed. Huge paper lanterns hung all around the backyard. Cheerful red and white tablecloths covered 4 long tables. Half a dozen kids from their class were already there, playing kickball beside the tables. Look at Mrs. Jeepers, Melody said. The 5 kids stared at their third grade teacher. Mrs. Jeepers wore her favorite outfit, a purple and green polka-dotted dress with a green brooch. She even had her usual bright green painted fingernails, but a white apron was strapped around her waist, and a huge white chef's hat perched on top of her long red hair. She stood in front of a smoking barbecue grill. Oh, great, Eddie muttered. She's ready to cook us alive. Chapter 2, Mush and Brew. Don't be silly, Liza told Eddie. You know Mrs. Jeepers isn't really a vampire. We don't know that for sure, Eddie said, but I do know that if I have to be here, I might as well have fun. Eddie and Melody ran off to play kickball. Liza and Howie walked over to say hello to Mrs. Jeepers. Thank you for inviting us, Liza told Mrs. Jeepers. Can we help you? Mrs. Jeepers flashed her green eyes at Liza and Howie and spoke in her Romanian accent. I am delighted that you could make it. Would you like to finish preparing the brew? Brew? Asked Howie. Yes. Cold Brewmaker's Brew is one of my favorite drinks. Just fill these cups with the brew in that pot. Mrs. Jeepers pointed to a big black cauldron before turning back to the smoking grill. Howie peered at the foamy orange liquid bubbling near the top of the pot. Do you think it's safe? He whispered to Liza. Let's get Eddie to try it. Liza giggled. If he doesn't die, we'll drink it too. They poured the brew into cups, being careful not to spill any of the foaming liquids on their hands. As they finished, they heard a loud shout. Howie jumped out of the way just in time. The kickball landed right in the pot of leftover Brewmaker's brew. Orange foam flew everywhere. Liza screamed as the foam splashed onto her t-shirt and face. Eddie came out and grabbed the kickball out of the pot. Sorry about that, he said with a grin. Liza, you look like a crazed cantaloupe. Eddie fell silent when Mrs. Jeepers flashed her eyes in his direction. Eddie mumbled another apology and ran off to kick the ball to Melody. Thank you so much, Mrs. Jeepers said from behind them. You are such a help. Would you like to set out the monster mush and bread? Liza, you may wipe yourself off while you are in the kitchen. Monster mush, Howie and Liza said together. It is just inside the kitchen door. You may set 1 bowl on each table, along with some bread, Mrs. Jeepers told them. Next, you'll have us scooping up Dracula droppings, Howie whispered. Liza giggled, but she stopped laughing when she opened the door to Mrs. Jeepers' kitchen. And that's the end of chapter 2.